Okay, in this 51st video, we have the epilogue to the Red Book. So it's in huge type and there's a symbol of the cross after the word epilogue. Oh, that's the referencing the footnote, which says this appears on p 190 of the calligraphic volume of Liber Novus. The transcription was abruptly left off in the middle of the sentence of a sentence on p 189. This epilogue appears on the next page in Jung's normal handwriting. This in turn was abruptly left off in the middle of a sentence. Epilogue. 1959. I worked on this book for 16 years. My acquaintance with alchemy in 1930 took me away from it. The beginning of the end came in 1928, when Wilhelm sent me the text of The Golden Flower, an alchemical treatise. There, the contents of this book found their way into actuality, and I could no longer continue working on it. To the superficial observer, it will appear like madness. It would also have developed into one, had I not been able to absorb the overpowering force of the original experiences. With the help of alchemy, I could finally arrange them into a whole. I always knew that these experiences contained something precious, and therefore I knew of nothing better than to write them down in a precious, that is to say, costly book, and to paint the images that emerged through reliving it all as well as I could. I knew how frightfully inadequate this undertaking was, but despite much work and many distractions, I remained true to it, even if another possibility never. And then it cuts off. And now we have Appendix A, which is a series of images. Just going to see what they are. So they're mandala sketches, rough mandala sketches. Dating from the 1st and 2nd of August, 1917, others through that month, and then September 1917. Not especially interesting, but he does begin to sketch Systema Munditotis, Munditotius, Systema Munditotius. This is the sketch from Black Book 5, P169. There's a legend of the symbols in the image. It's a bunch of like draft sketches that have been included in Appendix A, and then the full version of Systema Munditotius. It's spelt Systema and then Munditotius, which is easy to look up. And I will read the description here because it's so important. In 1955, Jung's Systema Munditotius was published anonymously in a special issue of Du, dedicated to the Eranos conferences. In a letter of Feb 11, 1955 to Walter Corti, Jung explicitly stated that he did not want his name to appear with it. He added the following comments. It portrays the antinomies of the microcosm within the macrocosmic world and its antinomies. At the very top, the figure of the young boy in the winged cage, called Erechopaios or Phanes, and thus reminiscent as a spiritual figure of the Orphic gods. His dark antithesis in the depths is here designated as Abraxas. He represents the Dominus Mundi, the lord of the physical world, and is a world creator of an ambivalent nature. Sprouting from him, we see the tree of life, labeled Vita, life, while its upper counterpart is a light tree in the form of a 7-branched candelabra, labeled Ignis, fire, and Eros, love. Its light points to the spiritual world of the divine child. Art and science also belong to this spiritual realm, the first represented as a winged serpent and the second as a winged mouse, as hole-digging activity. The candelabra is based on the principle of the spiritual number 3, twice 3 flames, with one large flame in the middle. While the lower world of Abraxas is characterized by 5, the number of natural man, the twice 5 rays of his star. The accompanying animals of the natural world are a devilish monster and a larvae. This signifies death and rebirth. A further division of the mandala is horizontal. To the left, we see a circle indicating the body or the blood, and from it rears the serpent, which winds itself around the phallus as the generative principle. The serpent is dark and light, signifying the dark realm of the earth, the moon, and the void, therefore called Satanas. The light realm of rich fullness lies to the right, where from the bright circle Frigus sive amor Dei, cold or the love of God, the dove of the Holy Ghost takes wing, and wisdom, Sophia, pours from a double beaker to left and right. This feminine sphere is that of heaven. The large sphere, characterized by zigzag lines or rays, represents an inner sun. Within this sphere, the macrocosm is repeated, but with the upper and lower regions reversed, as in a mirror. These repetitions should be conceived as endless in number, growing even smaller until the innermost core, the actual microcosm, is reached. I might just do all of these in one go, the appendices, because then it's not that long. So we have pages 365 through 71. It is going to take a bit, but we'll get through it. Appendix B, which is the commentaries. It says, age, male, enantiodromia of the life type. It is difficult to force this image to make a statement. Yet it is so allegorical that it ought to speak. It's not clear what image he's referring to. Maybe we'll find out. Oh, hang on, wait, it does refer. Sorry, it's Appendix B commentaries, and it's commentaries on a certain page, which are in the original pages 86 through 9, and corresponding here to 245 to 48, which I will find. 245 to 48. Which is 245 to 48 is Liber Primus, Mysterium Encounter. It's the episode Mysterium Encounter, which goes over those pages. So one might wish to review that. It's the first of the three most important visions of the Liber Primus, and the image referred. Let's see if I can find that. 1 second. He hadn't really got going with the images yet, because it's just the last couple of pages in the Liber Primus, which can be looked at, and it's like the one with Elijah and Salome is there, but it's from image 9, CAPIX, and it's just really a heading. So, but yeah, it's about Mysterium Encounter, and so it's not clear what image he's talking about. But anyway, hopefully we'll find out. It goes, it is difficult to force this image to make a statement, yet it is so allegorical that it ought to speak. It differs from the earlier experiences in that it is more witness than experience. For that matter, all the images that I've placed under the title Mystery Play are rather more allegorical than actual experiences. They are certainly not intended allegories. They have not been consciously contrived to depict experience as either veiled or even fantastic terms. Rather, they appeared as visions. It was not until I reworked them later that I realized more and more that they could in no way be compared with the experiences portrayed in the other chapters. These images apparently are portrayals of personified unconscious thoughts. That follows from their imagistic manner. They also called for more reflection and interpretation than the other experiences, to which I could not do justice with cogitation, because they were quite simply experiences. The images of the mystery play, on the other hand, personify principles accessible to thinking and intellectual understanding, and their allegorical manner accordingly also invites such an attempt at explanation. The action is set in a dark earthly depth, evidently an allegorical representation of the inner depths beneath the extension of the bright space of consciousness or the psychic field of vision. Sinking into such a depth corresponds to averting the mental gaze from outer things and focusing it on the inner dark depths. Gazing at the darkness to some extent animates the previously dark background. Since gazing at the darkness occurs without conscious expectation, the inanimate psychic background has an opportunity to let its contents appear, undisturbed by conscious assumptions. The preceding experiences indicated that strong psychic movements were present that consciousness could not grasp. Two figures, the old sage and the young maiden, step into the field of vision, unexpectedly for consciousness, but characteristic of the mythological spirit upon which consciousness rests. This configuration is an image that forever recurs in the human spirit. The old man represents a spiritual principle that could be designated as logos, and the maiden represents an unspiritual principle of feeling that could be called eros. A descendant of logos is nous, the intellect, which has done away with the commingling of feeling, presentiment, and sensation. Presentiment meaning intuition. In contrast, the logos contains this commingling. But it is not the product of such blending, or else it would be a lower animalistic psychic activity, yet it masters the blend, so that the four fundamental activities of the soul become subordinate to its principle. It is an independent principle of form that means understanding, insight, foresight, legislation, and wisdom. The figure of an old prophet is therefore a fitting allegory for this principle, since the prophetic spirit unites in itself all these qualities. In contrast, eros is a principle that contains a commingling of all the fundamental activities of the soul, just as much as it masters them, although its purpose is completely different. It is not form-giving, but form-filling. It is the wine that will be poured into the vessel. It is not the bed and direction of the stream, but the impetuous water flowing in it. Eros is desire, longing, force, exuberance, pleasure, suffering. Where logos is ordering and insistence, eros is dissolution and movement. They are two fundamental psychic powers that form a pair of opposites, each one requiring the other. The old prophet expresses persistence, but the young maiden denotes movement. Their impersonal essence is expressed by the fact that they are figures belonging to general human history. They do not belong to a person, but have been a spiritual content of the world's peoples since time immemorial. Everyone has them, and therefore these figures recur in the work of thinkers and poets. Such primordial images have a secret power that works just as much on human reason as on the soul. Wherever they appear, they stir something linked with the mysterious, the long gone, and heavy with foreboding. They stir something linked with the mysterious, the long gone, and heavy with foreboding. A string sounds, whose vibration reverberates in every man's breast. These primordial images dwell in everyone, as they are the property of all mankind. Jung here employs a metaphor used by Jacob Burckhardt to describe the primordial images of Faust and Oedipus, which he had cited in Transformation Symbols of the Libido. It appears to refer to the images like the visions of Elijah and Salome that he had throughout, but especially in Mysterium, Encounter, Instruction, and Resolution, the end of the Liber Primus. Moving on. So he said, a string sounds whose vibration reverberates in every man's breast. These primordial images dwell in everyone, as they are the property of all mankind. This secret power is like a spell, like magic, and causes elevation just as much as seduction. It is characteristic of primordial images that they take hold of man where he is utterly human, and a power seizes him, as if the bustling throng were pushing him. And this happens even if individual understanding and feeling rise up against it. What is the power of the individual against the voice of the whole people in him? He is entranced, possessed, and consumed. Nothing makes this effect clearer than the serpent. It signifies everything dangerous and everything bad, everything nocturnal and uncanny, which adheres to logos as well as to eros, so long as they can work as the dark and unrecognized principles of the unconscious spirit. The house represents a fixed abode, which indicates that logos and eros have permanent residence in us. Salome is represented as the daughter of Elijah, thus expressing the order of succession. The prophet is her producer. She emanates from him. The fact that she is assigned to him as a daughter indicates a subordination of eros to logos. Although this relation is very frequent, as manifested by the constancy of this primordial image, it is nevertheless a special case that possesses no general validity. For if these were two opposed principles, one could not arise from the other and thus depend on it. Salome is hence apparently no complete, correct embodiment of eros, but a variety of the same. This supposition is later confirmed. That she is actually an incorrect allegory for eros also stems from the fact that she is blind. Eros is not blind, since he regulates, just as well as logos does, all fundamental activities of the soul. The blindness indicates her incompleteness and the absence of an essential quality. By virtue of her shortcoming, she depends upon her father. The indistinct, glittering walls of the hall point to something unrecognized, perhaps something valuable that wakens curiosity and attracts attention. In this manner, creative involvement is woven even deeper into the image, so that an even greater animation of the dark background becomes possible. Such enhanced attention gives rise to the image of an object, which to all intents and purposes expresses concentration, namely the image of a crystal, which has been used to produce such visions since time immemorial. These figures, which at first are incomprehensible to the beholder, evoke dark processes in his soul, which to a certain extent lie even deeper, such as in the vision of blood, and whose perception requires an aid, like the crystal. As has been said, however, this expresses nothing else than an even stronger concentration of creative attention. A figure like the prophet, which is clear and complete in itself, arouses less curiosity than the unexpected form of blind Salome, which is why one may expect that the formative process will first address the problem of eros. Hence, an image of Eve appears first, together with images of the tree and the serpent. This apparently refers to temptation, as already encapsulated in the figure of Salome. Temptation brings about a further movement toward the side of eros. This in turn forebodes many adventurous possibilities, for which the wandering of Odysseus is the fitting image. This image stimulates and invites adventurousness. It is as if a door opened to a new opportunity to free the gaze from the dark confinement and depths in which it was held fast. Hence the vision opens onto a sunny garden, whose red blooming trees represent a development of erotic feeling, and whose wells mean a steady source. The cool water of the well, which does not inebriate, indicates the logos. Therefore, Salome also speaks later of the deep wells of the prophet. This suggests that the development of eros also means a source of knowledge, and with this Elijah begins to speak. Logos undoubtedly has the upper hand in this, my case, since Elijah says that he and his daughter have always been one. Yet Logos and eros are not one, but two. In this case, however, Logos has blinded and subjugated eros. But if this is the case, then the necessity will also arise to free eros from the clutch of Logos, so that the former will regain vision. Therefore, Salome turns to me, because eros is in need of help, and because I have apparently been enabled to behold this image for precisely this reason. The soul of the man is more inclined to logos than to eros, which is more characteristic of the essence of the woman. The subjugation of eros through logos explains not only the blindness of eros, but also the somewhat strange fact that eros is represented precisely by the not-so-pleasing figure of Salome. Salome denotes bad qualities. She brings to mind not only the murder of the Holy One, but also the incestuous pleasure of the father. A principle always has the dignity of independence, but if this dignity is taken from it, it is debased and then assumes a bad form. We know that psychic activity and qualities that are deprived of development through repression degenerate and thus become bad habits. Either an open or secret vice takes the place of a well-formed activity and gives rise to a disunity of the personality with itself, signifying a moral suffering or a real sickness. Only one way remains open to whoever wants to free himself from the suffering. He must accept the repressed part of his soul. He must love his inferiority, even his vices, so that what is degenerate can resume development. Wherever Logos rules, there is order but too much persistence. The allegory of paradise, where there is no struggle and therefore no development, is fitting here. In this condition, the repressed movement degenerates and its value is lost. This is the murder of the Holy One, and the murder happens because, like Herod, Logos cannot protect the Holy One on account of his own weakness, because he can do nothing else than hold on to himself, thus inducing the degeneration of eros. Only disobedience against the ruling principle leads out of this condition of undeveloped persistence. The story of paradise repeats itself, and hence the serpent winds its way up the tree because Adam should be led into temptation. Every development leads through the undeveloped, but capable of development. Every development leads through the undeveloped, but capable of development. In its undeveloped condition, it is almost worthless, while development represents a highest value that is unquestionable. One must give up this value, or at least apparently give it up to be able to attend to the undeveloped. But this stands in the sharpest contrast to the developed, which perhaps represents our best and highest achievement. The acceptance of the undeveloped is therefore like a sin, like a false step, a degeneration, a descent to a deeper level. In actual fact, however, it is a greater deed than remaining in an ordered condition at the expense of the other side of our being, which is thus at the mercy of decay. Now we have a section which is referring to pages 245 to 248 above, which appears to be the same, which doesn't make any sense. In the sort of text itself, that first part which we were just on refers to pp 86 to 89, 86 to 89 in, I guess, the calligraphic volume. Sorry, that page number is referred to the corrected draft, which Shamdasani says correspond to page 245 to 248 above. And where we're up to now, in the original, says pp referring to pp 103 to 119. Very different than 86 to 89, right? But he says also that this corresponds to pp 245 to 248 above, which I believe to be incorrect, because that was what we were just talking about. So thank you, Samdashani. No offense. But who knows what passage this is referring to? I guess we'll find out. Quote, the scene of the action is the same place as in the first image. The allusion to a crater heightens the impression of a large cavity that reaches far down into the interior of the earth. This depth is not inactive, but violently discharges all kinds of matter. Since Eros poses the most serious problem at first, Salome enters the scene, blindly groping her way toward the left. It might refer to instruction and resolution, but I wonder if there were later scenes with Elijah and Salome where she enters blindly from the left in Liber Secundus. I don't think so. I think it's referring all to the end of the Liber Primus, those three sections. Anyway, since Eros poses the most serious problem at first, Salome enters the scene, blindly groping her way toward the left. Even what appear to be negligible details are important in such visionary images. The left is the side of the inauspicious. This suggests that Eros does not tend toward the right, the side of consciousness, conscious will, and conscious choice, but toward the side of the heart, which is less subject to our conscious will. This movement toward the left is emphasized by the fact that the serpent moves in the same direction. The serpent represents magical power, which also appears where animal drives are aroused imperceptibly in us. They afford the movement of Eros the uncanny emphasis that strikes us as magical. Magical effect is the enchantment and underlining of our thought and feeling through dark instinctual impulses of an animal nature. The movement toward the left is blind, that is, without purpose and intention. It hence requires guidance, not by conscious intention, but by logos. Elijah calls Salome back. Her blindness is an affliction, and as such demands healing. Closer scrutiny at least partially invalidates the prejudice against her. She seems to be innocent, and perhaps her badness ought to be attributed to her blindness. Logos asserts its power over Eros by calling back Salome. The serpent also obeys Logos. It rests with Logos and Eros to emphasize the power and significance of this image. A natural consequence of this magical, powerful view of the union of Logos and Eros is the strongly felt smallness and insignificance of the I, which finds expression in a sense of boyishness. It appears as if the movement toward the left, following blind Eros, is not possible, or effectively disallowed, without the intervention of Logos. From the perspective of Logos, following a movement blindly is a sin, because it is one-sided and violates the law that man must forever strive for the highest degree of consciousness. Therein lies his humanity. The other he has in common with animals. Jesus also says, if you know what you are doing, you are blessed. If you do not know what you are doing, you are damned. That's an apocryphal insertion to Luke 6:4 from the Codex Bezae. B-E-Z-A-E, Bezae. Quote, man, if indeed you know what you are doing, happy are you, but if not, you are accursed and a transgressor of the law. Cited in answer to Job. Continuing, the movement toward the left would be possible and permitted only if a conscious seeing notion of it existed. Formulating such a notion is not possible without the intervention of Logos. The first step toward developing such a notion is to become conscious of the goal or intention of the movement. Hence, Elijah asks about the intention of the eye, and it must admit its blindness, that is, its ignorance about intention. The only recognizable thing is a longing, a wish, to unravel the embroilment caused by the first image. Such making conscious stirs a vague sense of happiness in Salome, understandably so, since consciousness means insight, that is, a healing of her blindness. Thus, a step toward attaining the healing of Eros is taken. At first, the eye remains in its inferior position, since its ignorance prevents it from surveying the further development of its problem. Nor would it know which direction to take, since it has never cast its gaze into the depths of its psychic substratum, but has seen only what meets the eye and recognized only the powers of consciousness and the conscious world as effective forces, half-consciously denying its inner impulses. Faced with its own depths, such an eye can only feel embarrassed. Its belief in a conscious upper world had been so firm that going down into the depths of the self is like guilt, a betrayal of conscious ideals. But since its desire to unravel the embroilment is greater than its aversion to its own inferiority, the eye entrusts itself to the guidance of Logos. Since nothing comes into view that could answer the question raised, even greater depths must evidently be opened up. This in turn occurs with the help of the crystal, that is, through the utmost concentration of expectant attention. The first image to appear in the crystal is the Mother of God with child. This image is obviously related and opposed to the vision of Eve in the first image. Just as Eve represents carnal temptation and carnal motherhood, the Mother of God stands for carnal virginity and spiritual motherhood. The first direction would be a movement of Eros toward the flesh, the latter toward the spirit. Eve is an expression of the carnal side, whereas Mary expresses the spiritual side of Eros. As long as the eye saw only Eve, it was blind. The evocation of awareness, however, affords a spiritual view of Eros. In the first case, the eye became an Odysseus on an adventurous journey, which concludes with the aging man's return to Penelope, the motherly woman. In the latter case, the eye is depicted as Peter, the chosen rock upon which the church is to be founded. The key is the symbol of the power of binding and loosing buttresses. The key as the symbol of the power of binding and loosing buttresses this idea and leads one to the image of the Pope as God's governor on earth with a threefold crown. Undoubtedly, the eye becomes involved in a movement toward spiritual power, as attested by the one-sidedness of the movement. The vision of Eve leads astray to adventurous Odysseus, to adventurous Odyssey, to Circe and Calypso. The vision of the Mother of God, on the other hand, turns desire away from the flesh and toward the humble veneration of the spirit. Eros is subject to error in the flesh, but in the spirit it rises above the flesh and the inferiority of carnal error. It therefore almost imperceptibly becomes the spirit, the power over the flesh in the guise of love, and thus spiritual power casts off the mantle of love, although the former believes it loves the spirit. In effect, it rules the flesh. And the more powerful it is, the less loving it is. And the less it loves the spirit, the more it is carnal power. On account of its power over the flesh, the love of the spirit thus becomes a secular power drive in spiritual guise. Christ overcame the world by burdening himself with its suffering, but Buddha overcame both the pleasure and suffering of the world by disposing of both, and thus he entered into non-being, a condition from which there is no return. Buddha is an even higher spiritual power that derives no pleasure from controlling the flesh, since he has altogether moved beyond pleasure and suffering. Passion, whose conquest still requires so much effort in the case of Christ, and does so incessantly and in ever greater measure, has left Buddha and surrounds him as a blazing fire. He is both unaffected and untouchable. But if the living eye approaches this condition, its passion may leave it, though it will not die. Or are we not our passion? And what happens to our passion when it leaves the eye? The eye is consciousness, which only has eyes in front. It never sees what is behind it. But that is where the passion it has overcome in front regroups. Unguided by the eye of reason, unmitigated by humaneness, the fire becomes a devastating, bloodthirsty Kali who devours the life of man from within. As the mantra of her sacrificial ceremony says, "Hail to you, O Kali, triple-eyed goddess of dreadful aspect, from whose throat hangs a necklace of human skulls. May you be honored with this blood." Salome must, of course, despair of this end, which would like to turn Eros into spirit, since Eros cannot exist without the flesh. In resisting the inferiority of the flesh, the eye resists its female soul, which represents everything that strives to suppress consciousness against spirit. Thus, this path also results in an opposition. Hence, the eye returns from beholding the figures embodying its conflict. Logos and Eros are reunited as if they had overcome the conflict between spirit and flesh. They appear to know the solution. The movement toward the left, which started from Eros at the beginning of the image, now commences from Logos. He starts moving toward the left, to complete with seeing eyes what began in blindness. At first, this movement leads into greater darkness, which is then still somewhat illumined by the reddish light. The color red points to Eros. While it does not emit a bright light, Eros at least provides an opportunity to recognize something, perhaps even merely by inducing a situation in which man can recognize something, provided Logos assists him. Elijah leans against the marble lion. The lion as a royal animal signifies power. The stone suggests unshakable firmness, thereby expressing the power and solidity of Logos. Once again, awareness commences first, although now in greater depths and in renewed surroundings. Here, the eye experiences its smallness even more as it is even further removed from the world it knows, where it is conscious of its value and meaning. In these new surroundings, there is nothing to remind it of its meaning. Hence, it is completely overwhelmed by so much otherness, which so completely eludes its own discretion. Elijah assumes control of developing awareness. As the crystal visions have shown, the idea that should be conveyed to consciousness is an idea of spiritual power, that is, the eye was tempted to arrogate prophethood. But this idea encountered such a feeling of resistance that it could not assert itself against consciousness. Hence it remained behind the curtain. But since the eye could not follow Eros blindly, it sought at least to exchange spiritual power for this loss, as observed so very often in human life. It is almost inevitable that such a great loss, like that of Eros, presses man to search for a substitute, at least in the sphere of power. This occurs in such an uncanny, cunning manner that the eye mostly fails to notice the ruse, which explains why the eye, as a rule, cannot enjoy its power, since it does not possess power, but is possessed by the power devil. In this case, it would have been easy for the eye to grasp the fact that Elijah imposes himself with such living reality, and lay claim to this figure as a personality valuable in itself. But awareness has forestalled this deception. The appearance of living figures should not be taken personally, even though one is obviously inclined to assume responsibility for them. In reality, such figures belong just as much or little to our personality as our hands and feet. The mere presence of hands or feet is not characteristic of personality. If anything about them is characteristic, it is merely their individual character. It is thus characteristic of the eye that the old man and the young maiden are called Elijah and Salome. They might just as well have been called Simon Magus and Helena. What is significant, however, is that they are biblical figures. As proven later, this is one of the peculiarities of the psychic entanglement belonging to this movement. The awareness of the alluring idea of spiritual power shifts the question of Eros into the foreground again, once more in a new form. Both the possibility indicated by Eve and the one represented by Mary are ruled out. Hence, the third possibility remains, namely filial relationship, which avoids the two extremes of the flesh and the spirit, Elijah as the father, Salome as the sister, and I as the son and brother. This solution corresponds to the Christian notion of childhood in God. Salome, as Mary, makes up the as yet absent mother in what is a formidably ensnaring manner. This has a corresponding effect on the eye. There is something undeniably cathartic about the Christian solution because it seems to be altogether possible. There is a child in each of us, in the elderly. It is even the only thing still alive. One can have recourse to the childlike any time on account of its inexhaustible freshness and adherence. Everything, even the most ominous, can be rendered harmless through retranslation into the childlike. After all, we do this often enough in everyday life. We even manage to tame a passion by leading it back to the childlike, and perhaps the flame of passion collapses in a childlike lament even more often. Thus, there are many prospects for which the childlike can seem to be a satisfactory remedy, including not least the far-reaching effect of our Christian education, which hammers into us the notion of childhood in hundreds of mantras and hymns. Salome's remark that Mary is their mother must thus appear even more devastating. Since this prevents the childlike solution from developing, it immediately prompts another thought. If Mary is the mother, then inescapably I must be Christ. The childlike solution would have cancelled all reservations. Salome would no longer pose a threat, since she would be only the little sister. Elijah would be the caring father, whose wisdom and foresight would have left the eye to its own devices with childlike trust. But this is the unfortunate drawback constituted by childhood as a solution. Every child wishes to grow. Being a child involves the burning desire and impatience for future adulthood. If we return to being a child for fear of the dangers of Eros, the child will want to develop towards spiritual power. But if we flee into childhood for fear of the dangers of the spirit, we fall into arrogating the power of Eros. The condition of spiritual childhood constitutes a transition in which not everyone can remain. In this case, it stands to reason that Eros demonstrates to the eye the impossibility of being a child. One might think that it is not that awful to renounce the condition of childhood, but only those who fail to grasp the consequences of this renunciation think that way. It is not the loss of immemorial Christian views and the religious possibilities they ensured. Many bear this loss all too easily. But rather that what is renounced refers to the much more profound attitude that far transcends the Christian outlook, which provides individual life and thought with a tried and tested direction. Even if one has long abstained from Christian religious practice and has long ceased to regret this loss, one continues to behave intuitively and as if the original views still existed by right. One fails to consider that a discarded worldview needs to be replaced by a new one. In particular, one fails to be clear about the fact that renouncing the Christian outlook erodes present-day morals. Renouncing childhood means that no emotional or habitual dependence on hitherto valid moral views any longer exists. The hitherto valid view has arisen from the spirit of the Christian worldview. Notwithstanding all free thinking, our attitude to Eros, for instance, remains the old Christian view. We can now no longer bide our time peacefully without questioning and doubt, or else we will remain in the state of childhood. If we merely reject the dogmatic view, our liberation from the well-established will be merely intellectual, whereas our deeper feeling will persist on the old path. Most people, however, are unaware of how this sets them at odds with themselves, but later generations will become increasingly aware of this. Yet those who notice this will realize with horror that renouncing resumed childhood ousts them from our present times, and that they can no longer follow any of the traditional ways. They enter uncharted territory, which has neither paths nor boundaries. They lack any direction, since they have forsaken all established bearings. This realization, however, dawns upon very few, since the vast majority makes do with half measures and remains unperturbed by the stupidity of their spiritual condition. But then, tepidity and slackness is not to everyone's taste. Some would rather abandon themselves to despair than adhere to a worldview completely removed from the well-trodden paths of their habitual behavior. They would rather venture into a pathless dark land at the risk of perishing there, even if this should outrage all their cowardice. When Salome remarks that Mary is their mother, which means that the I is Christ, this means in brief that the I has left the state of Christian childhood and has taken the place of Christ. Nothing could be more absurd, of course, than to assume that the I thus would be presuming excessive importance. On the contrary, it takes up a decidedly inferior position. Previously, it had the advantage of being part of the crowd rallying behind a powerful figure, but now it has exchanged that for solitude and forlornness, rendering it as alien and lonely in its world as Jesus was in his, without possessing that great man's outstanding attributes. Being at odds with the world requires greatness, but the I experiences its almost ludicrous meagerness, which explains its horror at Salome's revelations. Whoever steps beyond the Christian outlook, yet does so definitely, falls into a seeming abyss, an utmost solitude, and lacks any means of hiding the fact. Of course, one would like to persuade oneself that this is not all that bad, but it is. Abandonment is about the worst thing that can happen to man's herd instinct, not to mention the daunting task with which we thus burden ourselves. Destruction is easy, but rebuilding is difficult. Thus, the image ends with a sense of gloom, which stands opposed, however, to the tall, quietly burning flame encircled by the serpent. This view denotes devotion coupled with the magical compulsion expressed by the serpent. Thus, an effective counterpart is set against the disquieting sense of doubt and fear, as if someone were saying, "Of course your eye is full of unease and doubt, but the constant flame of devotion burns in you more strongly, and the compulsion of your fate is more powerful." There's then a commentary on pp 127 to 150, which, according to Shamdasani, refers to pp 251 to 254. And I gather, yes, it is exactly as I said. So that second part was a commentary on instruction, which occurred after Mysterium Encounter, and this final part is a commentary on resolution, which occurs after instruction. And these are the three sections that finish Liber Primus. And it's quite short, and it goes, "The far-reaching premonitions of the second image plunged the eye into a chaos of doubt. Hence, an understandable desire arose to rise above the confusion to attain greater clarity, as expressed in the image of the beetling mountain ridge. Logos appears to be leading the way. What occurs next is the image of two opposites, expressed by two serpents, and the separation of day and night. Daylight signifies good, whereas darkness represents evil. As compelling forces, both assume the figure of serpents. Therein lies concealed an idea that subsequently assumes great importance. Whoever encountered a black serpent would have been no less surprised at encountering a white one. Color does not dispel fear. What this suggests is that perhaps an equally dangerous bewitching power resides in good as in evil. Essentially, the good needs to be regarded as an inherently no less dangerous principle than evil. In any event, the eye could decide to approach the white serpent just as little as the black one, even though it believes it can or must, by all means, entrust itself more to good than to evil. But the eye is rooted to the spot halfway, transfixed, and observes the struggle between the two principles within itself. The fact that the eye remains in this middle position implies the advance of evil, since anything but unconditional surrender to the good impairs it. This finds expression in the attack of the black serpent. But the fact that the eye does not partake of evil constitutes a victory for the good. This finds expression in the black serpent growing a white head. The disappearance of the serpent denotes that the opposition of good and evil has become ineffective. That is, that at least it has lost its immediate significance. For the eye, this means a release from the unconditional power of the hitherto abiding moral point of view, in favor of a middle position, freed from the pair of opposites. But neither clarity nor clear view has been gained thereby. Hence, the ascent continues to the final point of elevation, which might grant the longed-for outlook. Okay, final part, which is the last 2 pages, and it is Appendix C. The following is an entry from Black Book 5, which gives a preliminary sketch of cosmology of the 7 sermons. Okay, it goes 16:1:16. The force of the god is frightful. In quotations. You shall experience even more of it. You are in the second age. The first age has been overcome. This is the age of the rulership of the sun, whom you call the frog god. The third age will follow, the age of apportionment and harmonious power. My soul, where did you go? Did you go to the animals? I bind the above with the below. I bind God and animal. Something in me is part animal, something part God, and a third part human. Below you, serpent, within you, man, above you, God. Beyond the serpent comes the phallus, then the earth, then the moon, and finally the coldness and emptiness of outer space. Above you comes the dove or the celestial soul, in which love and foresight are united, just as poison and shrewdness are united in the serpent. Shrewdness is the devil's understanding, which always detects smaller things and finds chinks where you suspect none. If I am not conjoined through the uniting of the below and the above, I break down into three parts. The serpent, and in some other form, I roam. And in that or some other animal form, I roam, living nature daemonically, arousing fear and longing. The human soul, living forever within you. The celestial soul, as such dwelling with the gods, far from you and unknown to you, appearing in the form of a bird. Each of these three parts, then, is independent. Beyond me stands the celestial mother. Its counterpart is the phallus. Its mother is the earth. Its goal is the heavenly mother. The celestial mother is the daughter of the celestial worlds. Its counterpart is the earth. The celestial mother is illuminated through the spiritual sun. Its counterpart is the moon. And just as the moon is the crossing to the dead of space, the spiritual sun is the crossing to the pleroma, the upper world of fullness. The moon is the God's eye of emptiness, just as the sun is the God's eye of fullness. The moon that you see is the symbol, just as the sun that you see. Sun and moon, that is, their symbols, are gods. There are still other gods. Their symbols are the planets. The celestial mother is a daemon among the order of the gods, an inhabitant of the heavenly world. The gods are favorable and unfavorable, impersonal, the souls of stars, influences, forces, grandfathers of souls, rulers in the heavenly world, both in space and in force. They are neither dangerous nor kind, strong yet humble, clarifications of the pleroma and of the eternal emptiness, configurations of the eternal qualities. Their number is immeasurably great and leads over to the one supreme fundamental, which contains all qualities in itself, and itself has none, and nothing and everything, the complete dissolution of man, death, and eternal life. Man becomes through the principium individuationis. He strives for absolute individuality, through which he ever increasingly concentrates the absolute dissolution of the pleroma. Through this, he makes the pleroma the point that contains the greatest tension and is itself a shining star, immeasurably small, just as the pleroma is immeasurably great. The more concentrated the pleroma becomes, the stronger the star of the individual becomes. It is surrounded by shining clouds, a heavenly body in the making, comparable to a small sun. It emits fire. Therefore, it is called, Greek phrase, meaning, I am a star wandering about with you. Citation from the Mithras Liturgy, Albert Dietrich. Jung carved the continuation of this sentence on his stone at Bollingen. Just like the sun, which is also a star, which is a god and grandfather of souls, the star of the individual is also like the sun, a god and grandfather of the souls. He is visible from time to time, just as I have described him. His light is blue, like that of a distant star. He is far out in space, cold and solitary, since he is beyond death. To attain individuality, we need a large share of death. Therefore, is called, Greek phrase, meaning, you are gods. This is a citation from John 10:34. The Jews answered him, saying, for a good work we stone thee not, but for blasphemy, and because that thou, being a man, makest thyself God. Jesus answered them, is it not written in your law? I said, ye are gods. Therefore it is called, you are gods. Since just as an innumerable number of men rule the earth, so a countless number of stars and of gods rule the celestial world. To be sure, this God is the one who survives the death of men. To him for whom solitude is heaven, he goes to heaven. To him for whom it is hell, he goes to hell. Whoever does not follow the principium individuationis to its end becomes no God, since he cannot bear individuality. The dead who besiege us are souls who have not fulfilled the principium individuationis, or else they would have become distant stars. Insofar as we do not fulfill it, the dead have a claim on us and besiege us, and we cannot escape them. Insert image 3, sketch of the Systema Mundi Totius. See Appendix A. The god of the frogs or toads, the brainless, is the uniting of the Christian God with Satan. His nature is like the flame. He is like Eros, but a god. Eros is only a daemon. The one God to whom worship is due is in the middle. You should worship only one God. The other gods are unimportant. Abraxas is to be feared. Therefore, it was a deliverance when he separated himself from me. You do not need to seek him. He will find you, just like Eros. He is the god of the cosmos, extremely powerful and fearful. He is the creative drive. He is form and formation, just as much as matter and force. Therefore, he is above all the light and dark gods. He tears away souls and casts them into procreation. He is the creative and created. He is the God who always renews himself in days, in months, in years, in human life, in ages, in people, in the living, in heavenly bodies. He compels, he is unsparing. If you worship him, you increase his power over you. Thereby, it becomes unbearable. You will have dreadful trouble getting clear of him. The more you free yourself from him, the more you approach death, since he is the life of the universe. But he is also universal death. Therefore, you fall victim to him again, not in life, but in dying. So remember him, do not worship him, but also do not imagine that you can flee him, since he is all around you. You must be in the middle of life, surrounded by death on all sides. Stretched out like one crucified, you hang in him, the fearful, the overpowering. But you have in you the one God, the wonderfully beautiful and kind, the solitary star-like unmoving, he who is older and wiser than the Father, he who has a safe hand, who leads you among all the darknesses and death scares of dreadful Abraxas. He gives joy and peace, since he is beyond death and beyond what is subject to change. He is no servant and no friend of Abraxas. He himself is an Abraxas, but not unto you, but in himself and his distant world, since you yourself are a god, who lives in faraway realms, and who renews himself in his ages and creations and peoples, just as powerful to them as Abraxas is to you. You yourself are a creator of worlds and a created being. You have the one God, and you become your one God in the innumerable number of gods. As a god, you are the great Abraxas in your world. But as a man, you are the heart of the one God who appears to his world as the great Abraxas, the feared, the powerful, the donor of madness, he who dispenses the water of life, the spirit of the tree of life, the daemon of the blood, the death bringer. You are the suffering heart of your one star God, who is Abraxas to his world. Therefore, because you are the heart of your God, aspire toward him, love him, live for him. Fear Abraxas, who rules over the human world. Accept what he forces upon you, since he is the master of the life of this world, and none can escape him. If you do not accept, he will torment you to death, and the heart of your God will suffer, just as the one God of Christ suffered the heaviest in his death. The suffering of mankind is without end, since its life is without end, since there is no end where none sees an end. If mankind has come to an end, there is none who would see its end, and none who could say that mankind has an end. So it has no end for itself, but it certainly does for the gods. The death of Christ took no suffering away from the world, but his life has taught us much, namely, that it pleases the one God if the individual lives his own life against the power of Abraxas. The one God thus delivers himself from the suffering of the earth, into which his Eros plunged him, since when the one God saw the earth, he sought its procreation, and forgot that a world was already given to him in which he was Abraxas. So the one God became human. Therefore, the one in turn pulls man up to him and into him, so that the one becomes complete again. But the freeing of man from the power of Abraxas does not follow man's withdrawing from the power of Abraxas. No one can pull away from it, but through subjugating himself to it. No one can pull away from it, but through subjugating himself to it. Even Christ had to subjugate himself to the power of Abraxas, and Abraxas killed him in a gruesome manner. Only by living life can you free yourself from it, so live it to such a degree that it befits you. To the degree that you live it, you also fall victim to the power of Abraxas and his dreadful deceptions. But to the same degree the star god in you gains in longing and power, in that the fruit of deception and human disappointment falls to him. Pain and disappointment fill the world of Abraxas with coldness. All of your life's warmth slowly sinks into the depths of your soul, into the midpoint of man, where the far blue starlight of your one God glimmers. If you flee Abraxas from fear, you escape pain and disappointment, and you remain terrified. That is, out of unconscious love, you cling to Abraxas, and your one God cannot catch fire. But through pain and disappointment, you redeem yourself, since your longing then falls of its own accord, like a ripe fruit into the depths, following gravity, striving toward the midpoint, where the blue light of the star god arises. So do not flee from Abraxas, do not seek him. You feel his coercion, do not resist him, so that you shall live and pay your ransom. The works of Abraxas are to be fulfilled, For consider that in your world you yourself are Abraxas, and force your creature to fulfill your work. Here, where you are the creature subjugated to Abraxas, you must learn to fulfill the work of life. There, where you are Abraxas, you compel your creatures. You ask, why is all this so? I understand that it seems questionable to you. The world is questionable. It is the unending, infinite folly of the gods, which you know is unendingly wise. Surely it is also a crime, an unforgivable sin, and therefore also the highest love and virtue. So live life, do not flee Abraxas, provided that he compels you and you can recognize his necessity. In one sense, I say to you, do not fear him, do not love him. In another sense, I say to you, fear him, love him. He is the life of the earth. That says enough. You need to recognize the multiplicity of the gods. You cannot unite all into one being. As little as you are one with the multiplicity of men, just so little is the one God one with the multiplicity of the gods. This one God is the kind, the loving, the leading, the healing. To him all your love and worship is due. To him you should pray. You are one with him. He is near you, nearer than your soul. I, your soul, am your mother, who tenderly and frightfully surrounds you, your nourisher and corrupter. I prepare good things and poison for you. I am your intercessor with Abraxas. I teach you the arts that protect you from Abraxas. I stand between you and Abraxas, the all-encompassing. I am your body, your shadow, your effectiveness in this world, your manifestation in the world of the gods, your effulgence, your breath, your odor, your magical force. You should call me if you want to live with men, but the one God if you want to rise above the human world, to the divine and eternal solitude of the star. So ending the epilogue and appendices in Carl Jung's The Red Book.